This question is the other side of who is your target audience, and that is, what is the player going to do? You always need to keep in mind what the player is doing and whether that is enjoyable. Games are always about doing something. They are active, not passive. In video games, you rarely have downtime, but even downtime is an opportunity to think. And so in many tabletop games that are turn-based, downtime is not so bad because people can think about what they're going to do next. So in the formative stages of a game especially, you should ask yourself, what is the player going to do? That can include thinking, it can include talking, it can include physical actions. Imagine in your mind's eye what is happening in the game. You can do this before you have any kind of prototype. Put yourself in the position of a player. Okay, what is the player going to do? How is he or she going to do it? Is this enjoyable? If no player is doing anything, then you clearly have a problem. If too many players are doing nothing much of the time, then you have a problem that's called downtime. Downtime is in disfavor these days, partly because of video games, even in turn-based games. People are used to doing things, and they don't like it when they're not doing something. If one player is doing a lot more than any of the others, there might be a problem, but that depends on the game. If it's a game where one player is playing against many, which is more common in tabletop games than in video games, then it might be all right. If it's a cooperative game and one player is playing one side and all the other players are playing the other, or if the computer is playing one side, it might be bad if one player dominates affairs. The other players might not enjoy it if they're just sort of watching instead of doing or participating. If whatever the player is doing isn't likely to be enjoyable, then you've got a big problem, because the whole point of games is doing something. Now, another way that you can have a big problem is if what the player is doing is hard to do for some reason that doesn't have to do with gameplay. So, if the controller scheme is bad, or if it's hard for the player to see how things are working out on the board, or otherwise there's a confusing interface, and both tabletop games and video games have interfaces. The video game interfaces are more complex usually. If the player is forced to do math in his or her head, that's usually a bad thing. It's not hard for some people, but an awful lot of people won't even try to do math in their head. They have never had a reason to do it, and it's not enjoyable to do it, and so they won't do it. And you can probably think of other occasions where the player is doing something that's ancillary to the game, that's not part of the gameplay, but is part of telling the game what to do, that is not enjoyable, and you've got to get rid of that. So remember, games are active, not passive. The player should be doing something. It may be doing something in his or her head, it may be a physical action, it may be something else, but the player should be doing something, or should not mind if they're not doing something. Perhaps when it's not their turn, what the player who's taking his turn is doing is interesting or might even be vital, and so they have to pay attention. In any case, be sure the player action is what the player in your target audience will enjoy.